A really simple way of explaining what negative therapy is, or what the negative approach is in therapy, is to think of this pretty common thing where we might be told to be ourselves as a kind of a bit of advice if we're worried what to do in a situation like an interview or something. People will often say, well, just be yourself and you'll be fine. And that is undoubtedly very good advice, generally speaking. There can't be anything wrong with that. But the interesting thing is, of course, that we can't. That isn't a positive thing. It's not a positive course of action. We can't be ourselves on purpose. We can try to. And this is a point that Alan Watts makes somewhere. When we try to be ourselves, we become artificial, stilted, wooden, bizarre, because we're trying to be ourselves. We're trying to simulate. We're simulating an authentic state. So no matter how clever our simulation, the fact that it is a simulation just takes us further and further away from actually being ourselves. So in this case, we're being an idea that we have of ourselves, which is a different kettle of fish entirely. So there is no positive or purposeful or deliberate way to be oneself, and yet it is eminently possible. It has to be eminently possible because we are ourselves, so of course it's eminently possible. The only thing is we have to not interfere, not get self-conscious about it, not mess it up. So it's not a case of what we do to be ourselves, but it's a case of what we don't do. So that's the negative paradigm in a nutshell. The important thing is what we don't do. If we don't do the thing we usually do to mess it up, then everything will be okay. So that puts us in an odd situation there, really, because if all we know is doing, and all we trust in is doing, and all we give credence to is doing, that actually banjaxes us because we're too afraid to stop interfering, because we believe that the result would be disastrous. So that's our normal situation, because we are 100% orientated to purposefulness, generally speaking, which means that we are afraid to stop with the purposefulness because we falsely believe it's only our purposefulness that's keeping things right. Actually, it's completely the other way around. Our purposefulness is resulting in our painful and unfortunate divorce from reality, and our painful and unfortunate chronic insincerity, because being the idea of yourself is always deeply insincere kind of a thing. It's kind of a deeply insincere kind of a thing that we're stuck in, because we're afraid of the genuine article, because we don't trust that it will be okay. Now, it could be said that that isn't true, that we do trust ourselves, but we do up to a point. We do until we learn not to trust ourselves, and the process of being an adult is entirely that situation. It's kind of like being naked and not being embarrassed about it because we're too naive to be embarrassed. Then we grow up and take our place in the grown-up world, and we're not naive anymore, and we have to cover our nakedness, and it's hugely embarrassing. So if you're in a group of people and you actually are completely unguarded, uncontrived, you haven't got any persona at all, you're not putting on your persona, then that's like being naked. So that's like realizing the dream where you realize you're going to work and you haven't got any trousers on or whatever, that kind of a thing. So that's what it's like when we become aware of ourselves, self-conscious, which cuts in at a certain age. And some people have it more than others. Some people get through life with being completely unself-conscious, which is great. Others of us have different degrees of self-consciousness, going up right to the acutely self-conscious, painful level, which is associated with social anxiety. And social anxiety isn't that rare. It could be said that most of us have social anxiety, but we know how to play the game to identify with our persona, so that we know what to do to fit in. Even if I have got social anxiety, that doesn't mean I don't know it. I just can't do it fluidly or fluently enough. It's awkward. You can see me doing it because I know I'm doing it. So there's a bit of awareness got in there somehow that prevents me just being stupid enough to be my persona without realizing I'm being my persona because I think it's really me. In other words, in everyday society, we play a game so fluently and so automatically we don't know we're playing it. If we were to see we're playing a game, that would banjax it, because we'd know that we're playing a trick, or that we're pulling some kind of a trick, and then doubt can set in as to maybe we're not doing it right, or there's a little gap there between we're doing it and being aware that we're doing it. So the awareness becomes the poison, really. Consciousness becomes the poison. Consciousness will spoil any game because we know that we're playing a game. If we know that we're playing a game, that's not a game, that's something else. So we can use this idea to talk about negative therapy and say, sure, it's fine to be yourself, but in order to be yourself, we have to learn to not do. It's not a matter of finding out all these things we have to learn to do, which we love. We absolutely adore having things to learn to do, that we can be taught, that we can be trained in. We love that kind of stuff. We think it's the answer to everything, but it's positive stuff. It's not the answer to anything at all, psychologically speaking. It's just another level of confusion, as if there aren't enough levels already. Now, it is theoretically possible that we could really research this business of being oneself and do loads and loads of research and come up with loads and loads of theories and kind of interventions and approaches, and come up with this really complicated kind of, you could do that for your MSc project, or get become a professor of it. And it would be very, very complicated and detailed, and it would be a complicated way of being yourself. But of course, the whole point there is that would be a total nightmare, as well as being hard work, having to simulate something that doesn't need simulating. So as I said earlier, no matter how good we are at simulating, that doesn't make it any less of a simulation. In fact, the better we get at simulating, the less likely we are to know that we're simulating, which is exactly the same point as I just made when I was saying that in society we play a game without knowing it. We simulate without knowing it. We're too good at simulating. Simulating is our second nature. We're all a bunch of simulators. And when we're talking about something that doesn't need simulating, which is who we really are, or we could also say reality doesn't need simulating. Why don't you bother? It's there already. Whatever you do, you're going to make a hash of it. Whatever you do, it's going to be an inferior version. And yet we do simulate. From the moment we wake up in the morning and draw our first breath and rub our eyes a bit, we're simulating all day long. Simulating is doing. We are doing. We're doing two things, it could be said. We're maintaining our artificial ego construct, our idea of who we are, and we're maintaining the belief that we have about the world and maintaining that, so we don't ever get to find that our belief is only just a belief. So we have to maintain the positive self, and we have to maintain the positive world, and that takes doing. And it's tiring, and there's always a possibility of it going wrong. So there's anxiety, cracks can appear. Then we have to keep it together, and that's not great. So that isn't just a kind of tangential example. That really is at the root of everything. So in order to extricate ourselves from the complications and neuroses that we're swallowed up in, we need to get better at not doing things. We need to get better at risking, because to not do something is to risk. Because if I'm doing something, I know what the outcome is. I know what's going to happen. So I feel safe. If I'm not doing, that's great. There's no effort, there's no stress, there's no responsibility. But the downside is there is a risk. Because I'm not doing it, I'm not controlling. I relinquish control. What's going to happen? And we don't know what's going to happen. There's no way to second guess it. There are no guarantees. Existence itself is a risk, as the existential philosophers have said. Is it a risk we're prepared to take? So the answer to that is no, by the way. Relating to reality is a risk. Why is it a risk? How can relating to reality be a risk? Sounds stupid, possibly. A lot of people would say that sounds stupid. Well, relating to reality is a risk because we don't know what reality is, and so when we relate to it, we don't know what we're going to be relating to, so we don't know what's going to happen to us. It's out of our control, and we love control. We're addicted to control, and there is truth, there is behind our fear, because reality is going to be different to anything we expected. It's going to be radically surprising, and that is going to change us. We don't know how it's going to change us, because we don't know what reality is, so of course we don't know how it's going to change us, but change us it will. And are we ready for that? And the answer to that is no, generally speaking. So instead of relating to reality, we relate kind of incestuously to our beliefs about reality, which is safe, which is zero risk. So that's the good side. Zero risk. Don't worry. You're not going to be changed in some unforeseen way. You're going to stay the same. You're going to have things on your terms. So we can see that as the plus, the lure, the thing that pulls us in. Downside is that, well, it's fairly obvious what the downside is. It's kind of like a whole thing is like a joke or a sham or a charade. We're making a mockery of ourselves. We're making a mockery of life. The whole thing is like empty, null, devoid of meaning, a pointless game. All so that we can have this sense of security. So we could also say that relating to reality is a negative thing. It's no good writing a book about how to relate to reality, or 10 steps to relating to reality, because our steps are not reality, they're constructs of thought. So again, we never leave the constructs of thought behind. We hop from one construct to another, and that is tedious to an infinite degree. We're caught in this tautological loop forever and ever and ever. So that's all positive therapy can ever, that's what all doing can ever do. trap us even further in the world of the known, the world of our own mental constructs, which we want on the one hand because that's what protects us or insulates us from the threat of an inconceivable reality that will always be inconceivable, because if it ever became conceivable, then we would have actually be relating to our construct again. Boy, do we love relating to a conceivable world, despite the fact that it is infinitely tedious. And what does infinitely superficial, infinitely tedious? So there's a price in that. The price is we become jaded, we can become bored of their own existence, which is more common than we might think it is, I'd say. I don't know if anyone's ever done a master's in that and done research into that to find out how many people are bored of their own existence. It'd be a tricky one because we don't admit it. We don't admit it to ourselves because that's kind of means you're a loser if you're bored of your own life, you're bored of your own existence. So we don't admit it to others or to ourselves, and we fool ourselves into thinking, yeah, life is happening, life is good, exciting stuff is happening, I'm going places, all that kind of stuff, which is all totally untrue. It's got to be untrue if all I'm relating to is the world that is made up of my own constructs, and if the one who is relating, which is part of the deal, isn't who I actually am, but my idea of who I am. So just to repeat something which I'm sure I've said too many times already, but the situation that we're in is where the idea of who I am, who I think I am, is relating to my idea of what I think the world is, which is incestuous, tautological, and pointless. And that's our situation, as long as we are in conservative mode rather than exploratory mode. And I reckon, and I don't know if anyone's ever done any research on it, which would obviously be very important to do, because research is it's very important to do research, of course. And yeah, I'd say that most of us are fed up to the back teeth of our own existence, which is why we go looking for temporary relief of one form or another, entertainment of one sort of form or another, distraction of one form or another. And our modern culture is nothing else but this. It starts off by putting us in an infinitely tedious situation, and we can't blame society, but as a manner of speaking, we can, and we can blame ourselves for creating society into the bargain, just so that we don't feel that we're getting off scot-free. So we're in this situation where everything's infinitely tedious and always will be, and the world of grown-ups, adults, who are sensible and who have entered into this collective construct we call society. And then society provides us with loads and loads of ways of kind of momentarily escaping from that tedium. That's the whole package. And it kind of suits everything that we are trying to escape from the tedium. That the basis, which is me being in the world, or my idea of myself being in my idea of the world, is utterly sterile and intolerable unless I do find a way of relieving the tedium. So then that motivation becomes what drives the social world, what drives all of our socialized activities, what drives our industries. We're relief-seeking mechanisms, and the relief that we're seeking is the relief from the infinite tediousness of our bogus existence. And talking about tediousness and tedium and being fed up is one side of the spectrum. but it turns into acute neurotic suffering when we get into it even more. So it's the sterility of it. Sterility, or kind of a lack of any real possibilities, is, it's not just a little thing, it's like darkness. It's mental suffering on an extreme scale. So we can go deep into that, go deeper into that as we become more aware of our actual situations. So there's a very curious thing, that we tend to think of a neurotic state as being removed from reality in a kind of a way, but actually it's one step closer to it, because there's a bit of consciousness coming to the picture there, a bit of awareness. And it's messing everything up because we're starting to see how rotten our existence is. And that's why people don't like it if you're depressed or if you're anxious. It's almost like a personal insult for people, because you're challenging their game, you're threatening their game, you're compromising the integrity of the game that we are all playing. So that's why we need to kind of traditionally either fix people or encourage them to feel that they can be fixed, which is impossible, because fixing in our kind of double speak really means believing in the illusion again. That's not fixing. And plus, it's not possible, because even though we can temporarily get away with believing in an illusion, it's not going to work out for us in the long run. So all this harping on about fixing, and this whole idea of mental health is returning us to the happy state we were before we started to be aware of what a crappy state of being that we have, is utterly nonsensical. And that's the battle cry of positive therapy, to return us to how we were when things were good, and everything will be fine. So it's kind of a nostalgic kind of a thing, really. Get you back on your feet, get you back doing the things you used to do, thinking the things, back into that world. As if things were great back then, but they weren't.